Truth doesn't ask permission to exist. It doesn't knock gently on your door. It enters, turns on the light, and reveals what you've been striving not to see. Money doesn't follow good. It doesn't follow effort. It doesn't follow education. And it doesn't follow your intention. It follows position. And when this phrase touches your mind, something inside you tries to reject it, because it threatens the oldest belief that sustains your identity, the idea that the world will reward those who are righteous. Machiavelli observes this reflection as one observes a trained animal. He doesn't judge it. He dissects it. He knows that human beings prefer a lie that offers hope to a truth that demands action. Imagine Machiavelli sitting before you, not as a historical figure, but as a living, cold, precise presence, with eyes that do not seek to console. He is not here to motivate. He is here to reveal the invisible mechanics that govern your life. His voice does not shout. It weighs heavily. He tells you without metaphor that systems do not love, do not respect, are not moved. Systems reward architecture. Virtue is a beautiful flame, but fire does not buy bread. You can be disciplined and still be disposable. You can be honest and still be ignored. You can be competent and still be trapped. And if this hurts you, it is because you have confused moral value with market value. Machiavelli calls this enchantment. And every enchantment has a price. He unfolds a mental map before you, as if drawing a throne room. There are no visible kings, crowns, or swords. There are chairs. And the chairs have heights. Some are on platforms. Others are on the floor. And almost everyone spends their lives trying to become better without realizing they are sitting in the wrong chair. Machiavelli doesn't ask if you are good. He asks, where are you? Who has access to you? Who controls the channel that decides whether you will be seen? Who sets the price of what you do? Who has the power to say yes or no about your destiny? This is the psychology of power. It's not about inner qualities. It's about external control points. Are you near the center, or are you orbiting far away like an obedient satellite? He says that power doesn't reside in the person, but in the place the person occupies. A weak man on the right throne becomes fearsome because the chair lends him strength. A brilliant man in the wrong place becomes irrelevant because the chair silences his voice. And then he pauses, as if he wanted you to feel the weight of what you are about to understand. Most people don't lose for lack of talent. They lose for lack of position. The world is not a court. It's a mechanism. And mechanisms obey gears, not prayers. Money, he says, behaves like water under gravity. But economic gravity is reversed. The water doesn't fall on those who work the hardest. It rises towards those who control the structure. It rises towards those who control access. It rises towards those who control distribution. It rises towards those who control pricing. The base joins hands, hoping the water will flow down as a reward for their effort. But cupped hands cannot hold back a river that has been diverted before it reaches you. And if you feel you are drowning despite swimming harder and harder, it's not because you are incapable. It's because you are fighting with the current, and the current was designed to carry you away from the center. Machiavelli doesn't call this injustice. He calls it structure. And here comes the psychological essence that almost no one dares to confront. You were conditioned to be virtuous where you should be strategic. You were trained to react, not to position yourself. You were educated to seek approval, not leverage. And the system loves this type of mind, because a moralized mind is a predictable mind. Morality, when misapplied, becomes a leash. It makes you ask permission. It makes you ashamed of wanting more. It makes you confuse silence with cowardice and negotiation with selfishness. Meanwhile, others understand the unwritten rule: those upstream define the lives of those downstream. He forces you to look at your own routine as if you were looking at an extraction mechanism. You trade time for survival. You obey deadlines, standards, and expectations that you didn't create. You give energy to maintain a machine that belongs to someone else. And you call this adult life, as if it were inevitable. Machiavelli doesn't accept the inevitable. He asks, why do you accept as normal being paid last? Why do you accept as normal having a roof over your head? Why do you accept as normal depending on the mood of a platform, the whim of a boss, the instability of a market you don't control? At what point did you decide that your destiny should be managed by other people's hands? The dark psychology begins here when you realize your emotion is being used against you. Hope blinds. Gratitude paralyzes. Loyalty binds. Need exposes. And guilt, that silent guilt, keeps you sitting in that low chair, repeating, I just need to try harder, because that phrase alleviates the terror of facing the truth. It's not about effort. It's about place. And place is a decision. Sometimes slow, sometimes brutal, but always a decision. Machiavelli doesn't preach cruelty. He preaches lucidity. He doesn't say be evil. He says be awake. He teaches you to observe human behavior as a game of signals and incentives. Whoever controls the channel controls reality. Whoever controls the discourse controls what you consider possible. Whoever controls access controls its price. And whoever controls its price controls your freedom. Do you want to master the invisible games? Then stop discussing morality and start mapping architecture. Stop seeking validation and start seeking position. Stop asking yourself, what do I deserve? And start asking yourself, what do I control? Because merit is a nice word, but control is a real force. Notice what happens when someone enters a room with status. People adjust their posture. The tone changes. Concessions arise. It's not magic. It's position. Notice what happens when someone has an audience. Even mediocrity becomes a reference point. Even repetitiveness becomes an authority. And why does this work? Because the human mind doesn't seek truth first. It seeks security. It seeks a fixed point. Most prefer to follow someone who seems right rather than study until they are right. Machiavelli understands this mental shortcut and treats it as a weapon. If you don't understand this, you become a target. If you understand it, you protect yourself. And if you are strategic, you lead. Then he puts a cutting question before you, because he doesn't ask for an opinion. He asks for a diagnosis. Are you in a place where your effort becomes power, or in a place where your effort becomes fuel for someone else's power? Are you near the point where value is captured, or are you stuck where value is merely produced and distributed upwards? Are you sitting in a chair that elevates your presence, or in a chair that erases your name? And if you don't know the answer, it's because you've been living inside the game without seeing the board. Machiavelli inclines his head, as if concluding a first lesson, and lets the last sentence fall slowly, so that it echoes. Money doesn't ask who you are. It asks where you are. And if you don't change that, nothing changes. From here on, it's not enough to agree. It's not enough to feel. Lucidity, when it's real, demands that you stop identifying with your virtue and begin to see your position as a temporary destiny, not a sentence. Because the question that follows is not comfortable. It's decisive. If the world is architecture, what are the structures that, at this very moment, are sucking its value and calling it normal? Have you ever felt that weariness that doesn't come from the body, but from the spirit, as if life is always one step ahead and you're always one step behind? You wake up early, keep your promises, solve problems that weren't even yours, navigate traffic, stand in lines, answer messages, manage your anxiety, pay bills, and yet you end the month with the feeling that the water never rises. Each year you learn to swim better, but the current seems to get stronger. And when you try to explain this to someone, you hear ready-made answers: lack of focus, lack of discipline, you need to want it more, you need to study. Machiavelli would listen to all this in silence, not because he agrees, but because he recognizes the pattern. These are phrases that protect people from the discomfort of seeing the structure. They transform a problem of position into a problem of character, because this gives the illusion of control. But real control doesn't come from motivational phrases. It comes from understanding which side of the river you're on. Machiavelli makes you see everyday life as an upstream and downstream map. He doesn't ask you to imagine castles and kings. He asks you to observe your own week. The meeting where you presented an idea and someone with more authority repeated the same phrase 2 minutes later and received the credit. The client who haggled with you to the bone, but paid without discussion when the proposal came with the right name at the top. The promised promotion that never came, while the person closest to the manager climbed without visible effort. The platform that changed its algorithm and drastically reduced your reach overnight, as if your dedication were irrelevant. You didn't lose because you got worse. You lost because the channel moved, and you were dependent on the channel. That's the river. You were going downstream. He says that most people live like this, without realizing it, because the current is silent. The water doesn't warn you that it has been diverted. It simply passes by you and goes away. The feeling of injustice arises when you confuse movement with progress. You think you are advancing because you are making an effort, but you are only expending energy to remain in the same place. And this is where Machiavelli introduces a detail that changes everything. The system doesn't need to directly stop you. It just needs to keep you busy. Constant occupation is an elegant form of imprisonment. A tired mind doesn't question the architecture. A tired mind accepts the ceiling as reality. A tired mind calls survival destiny. He describes the river with precision. At the base, the worker trades hours for survival. If he's not present, he doesn't get paid. If he gets sick, he loses. If he complains, he's replaced. In the middle, the manager leverages other people's time. His income grows when he coordinates more people, more processes, more projects. At the top, the owner captures value from the structure. He doesn't sell hours. He sells access. He sells channels. He sells presence. He sells the bridge over which the river flows. And even when he sleeps, the structure continues working for him. The difference isn't moral. It's about position. And Machiavelli insists on this because he knows the human mind tries to escape, but that's unfair. He coldly replies, it's not about justice, it's about mechanics. To bring this closer to your life, he shows simple scenes. A delivery driver on the street in the rain, pedaling against the wind, while the app adjusts the value of each delivery as if turning a destination knob. The driver runs, but the price isn't his. An employee trying to meet targets that change every month, without ever touching the part of the business that decides the price, the margin, the distribution. He produces value, but doesn't touch the point where that value is captured. A small entrepreneur selling cheaply because he fears losing the customer, while big brands raise prices and the public accepts because the brand reduces doubt. A talented person who creates content, but depends on an algorithm that changes without warning, and suddenly months of work become silence in a day. In these scenes, Machiavelli is present as a look behind reality, pointing to the same invisible thread: power is upstream. And then comes the twist that traps you. He says maybe you're not out of luck. Maybe you're exactly where the system needs you to be to keep functioning. Have you ever noticed how there are places that seem designed to drain your energy and give back just enough for you to keep going? Places where you chase after things but never catch up. Places where you need to be always available, always grateful, always ready to prove your worth, as if your existence were an endless interview. Machiavelli calls this a reactive position. And a reactive position is a psychological state, not just an economic one. It's living by responding, asking, waiting, tolerating. It's living under the logic of dependence. And dependence is the secret language of submission. He explains that, upstream, the language changes. Upstream, one doesn't ask. One defines. Upstream, one doesn't chase. One attracts. Upstream, one doesn't beg for a price. One sets a price. Upstream, one doesn't wait to be chosen. One creates scarcity, and the world adjusts. This sounds harsh, but it's real. And so that you don't confuse this with arrogance, Machiavelli clarifies it's not about humiliating people. It's about leaving the place where you are humiliated by the structure. It's about building a point of view where your presence carries weight. He asks you to observe another common situation: the job market. Two people with the same skills, the same resume, the same intelligence. One negotiates salary as if asking for a favor. The other dictates terms because they have options, because they have a network, because they have visibility, because they are close to the center. The skill is the same. The position is different. And the most disturbing thing, most believe that the difference lies in confidence. But confidence is usually an effect, not a cause. The person who has options seems confident because they can actually leave. The person who needs to accept anything seems insecure because they know they can't take risks. And the system senses this. Machiavelli says that necessity has a smell. And whoever smells of necessity loses value in the face of any structure. You begin to understand why money goes upstream. Because those upstream control the points where the water changes direction: platform, channel, distribution, intellectual property, customer access. Whoever controls this becomes the gravitational center of the system. And the further upstream you go, the less you chase the money, and the more the money chases you. Not because the universe favors you, but because the system was designed to favor this point of view. That's why some people seem to be blessed. It's not a blessing. It's positioning. And that hurts because it dismantles the romanticism you use to endure the routine. Machiavelli, however, doesn't let you remain merely indignant. He knows that indignation without direction is just another form of emotional waste. So he traps you in a simple, almost intimate question: in which areas of your life do you produce value without touching the control? In which areas do you obey rules you didn't help write? In which areas do you depend on channels that could cut you off tomorrow? Most people don't want to answer because the answer reveals vulnerability. And vulnerability is the truth the mind tries to hide from itself. He approaches the darkest point, the one people rarely verbalize. There's a strange comfort in staying downstream. The comfort of blaming the world, blaming luck, blaming time. Because assuming your position is the cause is assuming you'll have to move. And moving requires shedding skin. It requires letting go of identities. It requires breaking loyalties. It requires enduring the period of silence where the old hasn't yet died and the new hasn't yet been born. It's in this crossing that most give up, because they want change without discomfort, ascension without risk, power without psychological cost. Machiavelli calls this childish desire. And the world is not kind to childish desires. Finally, he returns to the image of the river and leaves a phrase that seems calm, but opens up an abyss. If you are downstream, you will always be paid last, because you are at the end of the current. You are not being punished. You are simply in a place where the flow arrives weakly. And as long as you don't understand how the flow is created, how it is diverted, and who decides where it passes, you will continue to call bad luck what is, in fact, architecture. And hey, race the mystery he leaves hanging in the air. Like a silent warning, not everyone upstream seems powerful. Some seem discreet, almost invisible, but they control the lever that moves the river. They don't appear, but they determine the price. They don't shout, but they decide access. And if you don't learn to recognize these control points, you'll continue admiring the wrong people, following the wrong voices, and fighting faceless enemies. In the next part, Machiavelli will show you where power truly hides, why talent alone becomes noise, and how the invisible corridors of influence choose who rises and who remains sinking, without even understanding why. Machiavelli now leads you out of the visible river and into the system, where there is no sound of water, only the dry sound of decisions that no one sees. He doesn't speak of castles or thrones. He speaks of discrete tables, rooms without signs, groups that don't appear on organizational charts, but that decide the lives of thousands of people with a nod. He says that most modern power doesn't show itself, it hides, because true authority doesn't need to prove its existence. You begin to realize that your idea of power may have been wrong from the start, trained by movies, news, and leaders who shout, while the true command points remain silent, almost invisible, like nerves behind the skin of the system. And it is in this silence that your income, your career, and your relevance are redesigned every day. Do you remember the last time you had a strong, perhaps even brilliant idea, and it died before it was born? Not because it was bad, but because it never reached the person who could validate it. It died in an ignored email, in a poorly timed meeting, in a "we'll see later" that never came back. Machiavelli calls this death by structural isolation. Ideas don't die for lack of value. They die for lack of a channel. You begin to understand that talent doesn't shout on its own, it needs channels to transform into influence. And most people live outside those channels, trying to make noise from outside the closed door. When you think about power, you think about who speaks loudest or is most visible, but Machiavelli forces you to observe who is behind those who appear. He says that every public face is supported by an invisible geometry of support, approvals, and access. If you are not part of this geometry, you can be the brightest person in the room and still be treated as background noise. Have you ever wondered why some people always seem to be in the right place at the right time, even without making a visible effort, while others have to beg for attention for years? Have you ever wondered who really chooses the names that rise, the voices that become the norm, the ideas that are labeled innovative? He then reveals something unsettling: most of his life is not decided by merit, but by proximity. Proximity to those in authority. Proximity to those with capital. Proximity to those who control distribution. And this proximity is rarely democratic. It is built in environments where you don't get in through your resume, but by invitation, by trust, by history, by alignment of interests. Machiavelli says that these places function like secular temples. They don't announce rituals, but they demand clear signs of belonging. Those who don't learn to recognize these signs remain outside, working hard for a system that will never admit them to its center. You may have been raised to believe that competence is enough, that at some point, someone will recognize your value. Machiavelli dismantles this belief with surgical precision. He says that the world doesn't perceive. It responds to stimuli. And stimuli only exist when they cross the right channels. Have you ever wondered why some people receive opportunities without asking, while others ask for years without receiving anything? Have you ever wondered why certain mistakes are forgotten when committed by those in positions of power, but become a death sentence when committed by those who are not? What invisible rule decides who can err and continue, and who is discarded at the first slip-up? It makes you think of everyday situations. A less prepared colleague who rises quickly because they are close to the manager. A mediocre project that receives heavy investment because it was presented in the right place. An excellent professional who remains in the same role for years because they don't have access to the core where decisions accumulate. And then it points out the psychological trap. You've been trained to see this as an isolated injustice, not as a structural pattern. Every time you call it an exception, you protect the system from your lucidity. You transform architecture into chance, and thus continue to obey. Machiavelli delves deeper into the analysis and enters the territory of dark psychology. He says that the human mind doesn't want power. It wants security. And security is offered by the group, by approval, by the feeling of belonging. That's why so many people unconsciously choose to stay out of the corridors of influence, because entering them requires giving up comfortable identities. It requires questioning loyalties, challenging implicit norms, enduring the discomfort of no longer being just good, but of becoming strategic. Have you ever wondered why so many people prefer to be praised for being dedicated rather than feared for being decisive? He then makes an unexpected revelation: the higher you climb towards the power structures, the less moral the world seems and the more technical it seems. Discussions cease to be about who deserves it and become about what works. Emotions give way to maps. Friendships give way to alliances. Not because people become evil, but because the environment changes the rules of the game. And most cannot tolerate this internal change. They prefer to remain in the realm of virtue, where they can continue to feel good, even if powerless. Have you ever wondered if your goodness isn't, at times, serving as an excuse to avoid the responsibility of taking a stand? Machiavelli makes you realize that corridors of influence are not just physical places. They are also mental states. It's the difference between waiting to be invited and creating the situation, between reacting to demands and setting agendas, between asking for space and occupying space. Most people live as if they were on a permanent visit to their own lives, always asking permission to exist. And the system responds accordingly. Those who ask receive crumbs. Those who occupy define limits. He then hands you an uncomfortable map. Every system has bottlenecks, and whoever controls the bottlenecks controls the destination. Bottlenecks aren't visible on the surface. They're in the processes, the contracts, the algorithms, the access points, the key relationships. Have you ever wondered who controls the bottleneck in your sector? Who decides who enters, who appears, who grows? Have you ever wondered if you're close to that point, or if you're just orbiting it like an obedient satellite? The feeling that sets in now is not anger, but bewilderment. As if you were realizing that your entire life has been lived in a waiting room you never chose. Machiavelli offers no consolation. He offers a mirror. He shows that modern power is not conquered with bravery, but with a precise reading of the invisible topography. And as long as you continue to confuse exposure with influence, position with authority, and effort with ascension, you will remain an excellent executor in a game where executors are abundant. He concludes this stage with an image that sticks in your mind. You're not on a staircase. You're in a labyrinth. And climbing doesn't mean climbing steps, but finding hidden doors. Some are locked from the inside. Others open only for those who know the psychological password of the environment. And most die trying to climb walls, never realizing that the exit isn't upwards, but inside the system. The question that hangs in the air, like a cut in the wind, doesn't demand an immediate answer, but requires honesty. Are you building talent to be seen, or are you learning to navigate the corridors where being seen isn't required? It's a consequence. There's a quiet moment in almost everyone's life when they realize they're running without getting anywhere. It's not a dramatic epiphany. There's no music or witnesses. It's a fleeting thought that arises while you check your bank balance, answer yet another email, or realize the year is over and nothing essential has changed. Machiavelli treats this instant as a sign of rupture. He says this discomfort isn't tiredness. It's a fracture of perception. It's the mind beginning to suspect that the game you've been playing wasn't designed for you to win. He approaches this fracture with stories that seem too common to ignore. An analyst who spent 10 years improving a company's internal processes, becoming indispensable but invisible. When the system was automated, he was replaced within weeks. The knowledge that seemed to be his strength was merely an operational detail. In another scenario, a small content creator who was never the best technically, but who understood the logic of distribution early on. She chose a single channel, obsessively studied its invisible codes, and in 2 years created a larger audience than professionals who had been there for a decade. It wasn't talent. It was position. Machiavelli points out that these two destinies are not exceptions, but symptoms of the same architecture. He then reveals a curious fact that few like to hear. Most people who become wealthy from scratch don't report an explosion of effort, but a change of environment. They change markets, types of problems, circles of influence. It's as if they change gravity. The same individual, with the same intelligence, the same discipline, starts producing completely different results simply because they moved from a low-leverage environment to a field where every decision reverberates. The world calls this luck. Machiavelli calls it repositioning. The narrative takes on a more intimate tone when he describes the routine of those who remain downstream. These are people who know how to do things, but don't know how to decide. Who deliver with excellence, but don't set the price. Who solve problems, but don't choose which problems deserve to exist. And the most perverse thing, the better you perform in this place, the more trapped you become, because the system starts to depend on you to continue functioning exactly as it is. You become an essential piece on a chessboard that was never designed to promote you. Machiavelli observes that excessive dedication to a weak position transforms into a gilded cage. You are not discarded, but you are not elevated either. You are maintained. He brings up an unlikely event to illustrate this. A small, nearly bankrupt independent publisher decided to stop competing for readers and start competing for authors. Instead of selling books, it began selling access. It created an exclusive network, an invisible corridor where new writers wanted to be. In a short time, giant publishers began to depend on this access to renew their catalogs. The publisher didn't get bigger. It became central. And centrality completely changed its negotiating power. Machiavelli smiles at this kind of movement because it confirms his thesis. It's not about size, it's about the connection. He then points out a disturbing pattern. Whenever someone changes their life, there is a prior rupture of identity. The person stops seeing themselves as the worker of their own destiny and begins to see themselves as its architect. This transition doesn't appear in photos, doesn't generate immediate applause, and that's why almost no one talks about it. But it always precedes the turning point. Machiavelli states that no one rises in position without first abandoning the narrative that sustained their old position. That's why so many people prefer to remain where they are. Changing places requires changing personal history, and that hurts more than continuing to suffer in a known way. He then introduces an almost paradoxical element. The rich don't take more risks than the poor. They simply choose risks that multiply. While most people accept survival risks, such as changing jobs or moving to a different city, those upstream accept architectural risks, such as building a canal, creating a platform, launching something that might publicly fail. These are risks that are not measured in hours, but in relevance. And the system rewards this kind of audacity because it alters the geometry of the market. Machiavelli says that courage is not about insisting, but about repositioning. To make this even more concrete, he describes the phenomenon of people who explode after years of anonymity. From the outside, it seems like a miracle. On the inside, it's almost always the silent accumulation of invisible assets, strategic relationships, a deep understanding of a niche, mastery of a distribution channel that nobody valued. The world only sees the end result and calls it luck. Machiavelli sees the map behind the miracle and perceives a replicable pattern. He then makes a conceptual pause that changes the tone of the narrative. There is no growth without displacement. You can improve infinitely from a weak position and still remain weak. This is not a criticism of effort. It is a criticism of the illusion that effort is neutral. Effort is shaped by the terrain. In some places, it generates power. In others, it merely keeps the system functioning as always. And the cruelest thing is that these places look alike. An elegant office, a friendly team, a productive routine. Everything seems like progress, but the architecture remains the same. Machiavelli makes it clear that the real turning point isn't when you work harder, but when you change the type of problem you're solving. You stop asking, how can I do this better? And start asking, why does this exist in this way? This question is frightening because it puts you on a collision course with established structures, but it's also the only one that opens doors that don't appear on official maps. He concludes the section with an almost unsettling sense of lucidity. You begin to distrust everything that previously seemed natural: your career, your income, your limits. Machiavelli doesn't accuse you. He merely observes perhaps you're not tired because you work too much, but because you work in the wrong place. And as long as you continue to confuse occupation with direction, you will continue to go through years with a strange feeling that something essential is always slipping through your fingers. Even when you do everything right, there is a specific moment when the mind begins to defend itself, as if it understands that what comes next might break down the last walls that still keep it comfortable. Machiavelli recognizes this moment in you now, perceives the rigidity in your thinking, the silent attempt to transform everything into theory, as if that were how you could remain exactly where you are. That is here that he accelerates the pace, because he knows that consciousness only changes when it is placed under pressure. He begins by recalling something you've already experienced, even if you never named it, that phase when everything seemed to be going well, when you believed you were rising, until suddenly an unexpected event shattered the illusion. Sudden dismissal, a budget cut, a change of platform, a crisis that wasn't created by you, but that fell upon your life like a verdict. People around you broke down, others, curiously, grew, not because they were better, but because they were positioned differently. Machiavelli points out that these ruptures are not accidents, they are systemic tests. The system, from time to time, rearranges itself. Those who depend on it suffer, those who control it become stronger. He brings up a fact that sounds almost cruel. Most people lose everything not at the moment of the crisis, but in the following months, when they try to rebuild their lives in exactly the same way. The world changes, but they return to the same chair, as if the problem were merely circumstantial. Machiavelli says that this is the true invisible collapse. The person survives the impact, but does not survive their own loyalty to a model that no longer exists. Then describes an improbable scene. An experienced professional, respected in his field, who spent decades building a career in a single sector. When the market turned, he didn't just lose income, he lost his identity. Everything he knew how to do was tied to an architecture that disappeared. At the same time, a young, almost unknown man with few resources had spent the last few years building something that nobody took seriously: a small community. His own distribution channel, a presence that didn't depend on any intermediary. When the shock came, the veteran imploded. The newcomer became a reference. Machiavelli observes that the world calls this an unexpected turn, but there is nothing unexpected about someone who builds where others ignore. The atmosphere intensifies when he talks about the 5 positions that multiply income and influence without requiring you to exhaust yourself. He doesn't present them as theory, but as forces you've already felt working against or in your favor. The social position, when you are seen as a reference point, not just an executor. The market position, when you operate in a field where value grows in scale, not in centimeters. The psychological position, when your presence reduces others' doubts and transforms every conversation into a decision. The tool position, when you stop depending on human effort and start using systems that expand your reach. And the distribution position, when you control the channel through which attention, information, or sales pass. Machiavelli makes it clear that these positions don't add up. They multiply, and that's why some seem to get rich without breaking a sweat, while others sweat without going anywhere. He then creates a direct tension. You probably believe that you only lack one of these positions in your life. That if you had more visibility, or more capital, or more contacts, everything would be resolved. Machiavelli surgically dismantles this hope. He says that the system doesn't change when you add an isolated element. It changes when you shift the center of your actions. As long as you remain dependent on a single point of validation, a single channel, a single manager or platform, you will remain vulnerable, and vulnerability is the language that power understands best. He brings to light a curious phenomenon observed in various fields: people who build multiple income streams but remain trapped. They multiply tasks, but not positions. They run between projects, freelance work, partnerships, but all anchored at the same structural level. For Machiavelli, this is merely elegant dispersion. Seems like freedom, but it's just distributed exhaustion. The twist comes when he reveals that most people aren't afraid of failing. They're afraid of changing their identity. Changing positions requires ceasing to be who you were. It requires explaining to your family why you're leaving something safe. It requires enduring stares that ask if you've gone mad. It requires accepting that you will be incompetent again for a while. That hurts the ego. Machiavelli says that the ego is the greatest guardian of low chairs. It protects the self-image, even if it costs the future. The pace quickens when he states that every real leap begins with an invisible decision. No one sees the moment you decide to stop competing for crumbs and start building access. No one sees when you stop asking yourself, what can I do? And start asking yourself, what can I control? This transition doesn't generate applause, but it changes the geometry of your life. You stop moving within limits and start redrawing limits. He then describes an event that seems small, but changes everything. A person decides to stop selling services and starts building property. Initially, income falls. Uncertainty grows. Those around them doubt. But something silent begins to form. They are no longer exchanging time for money. They are building something that remains when they are absent. Months later, perhaps years, the world only sees the result and calls it sudden success. Machiavelli sees the exact point where this person moved from execution to management. The tension reaches its peak when he makes it clear that there is no neutrality. Either you are moving up the hierarchy of capture, or you are stabilizing at a point where others capture your value. There is no pause in the system. There is no just for now. Each passing year consolidates your position, whatever it may be. And most wake up too late to realize they have built an entire life around a chair that was never designed to elevate them. He concludes with an almost urgent feeling. You can no longer hear all this as theory. Something begins to rearrange itself inside. Machiavelli leaves the promise and the threat hanging in the air at the same time. There is a mechanical way out of weak positions, but it will not be comfortable, it will not be approved by everyone, and it will not allow you to continue seeing yourself in the same way. In the next part, he will no longer describe the problem. He will deliver the exact transition map, step by step, so that you can discover if you are ready to stop being fuel and become a force. You've arrived here carrying a weight you may not yet be able to name, but that you already feel in your body. It's not guilt, nor anger, nor fear in isolation. It's the silent realization that your life hasn't been decided by you, but by the position you occupy within systems that didn't ask for your opinion to exist. Machiavelli doesn't appear now as a distant master, but as a presence walking beside you, almost like a firm whisper, reminding you that lucidity isn't a gift, it's a choice repeated every day. He doesn't promise comfort, he offers direction. You realize that nothing that has been said works if it remains only in the realm of ideas. Understanding architecture without moving within it is merely exchanging one illusion for another. Therefore, Machiavelli transforms reflection into concrete action. He asks you to do something simple and uncomfortable at the same time. Observe your own position without defending yourself. Look at your routine as if it weren't yours. See where you trade time for permission, where you depend on someone else to exist, where your value is captured before it reaches your hands. This cold observation is the first gesture of freedom, because everything you cannot see silently controls you. Next, it leads you to an internal decision that changes the course of everything. Stop wondering how to work better and start wondering where to work better. Where are the channels that define price, access, and attention in your field? Who controls the bottlenecks you cross every day without realizing it? What kind of problem do you solve now, and who benefits from it? From these answers, you are no longer lost, even if you don't yet know the way. You have stopped being just part of the flow and have begun to map the terrain. Machiavelli then proposes the most difficult move, because it happens internally before it happens externally, abandoning the identity that has been useful until now, but which has become an anchor. Perhaps you were the reliable person, the dedicated one, the one who never says no, the one who solves everything. This identity brought you recognition, but it also brought you an invisible ceiling. Letting go of this image doesn't mean becoming a worse person, it means becoming strategic. You stop living to prove your worth and start building value where it multiplies. He asks you to gradually build assets that don't depend on your constant presence. It doesn't matter if it's an audience, a system, a product, a network of relationships, or knowledge that the market recognizes as scarce. What matters is that something continues to generate impact even when you're away. That's the silent dividing line between those who spend their time putting out fires and those who build territory. Machiavelli also warns against seeking transformation through grand, dramatic gestures. Real repositioning begins with micro-decisions that no one applauds. Saying no to something that keeps you busy but trapped. Saying yes to something that seems uncertain but creates leverage. Choosing to learn what no one around you is learning. Approaching environments where decisions are made, even if you feel out of place at first. Every new chair seems uncomfortable until you realize it wasn't made to accommodate, but to elevate. You then understand that upward mobility doesn't happen in a straight line. There will be times when it seems you've regressed. Your income may fall, your security may waver, your image may crumble. Machiavelli prepares you for this, not as a punishment, but as a sign that you've broken free from inertia. The system always tries to pull back those who begin to slip away, because losing someone from a weak position means losing fuel. Resisting this force is the essence of change. The final reflection he shares is almost intimate. He says that the biggest trap isn't failure, it's procrastination. The feeling that you still have time, that you'll deal with it later, that you'll change things next year. But while you procrastinate, the architecture solidifies around you. Your habits become invisible contracts. Your routines become limits. And one day you realize you're no longer choosing, just repeating. Now, with all this inside you, the question isn't whether you understood. It's what you will do tomorrow. What small gesture will you make that alters your position, even if only by an inch upwards, on the invisible map of power? It's not about becoming a completely different person all at once, it's about getting up from the wrong chair for the first time. That's the moment Machiavelli considers sacred because it doesn't appear in photographs, but it redefines the entire narrative of your life. If this video made you see something that was previously hidden, don't let that perception die in silence. Like it now, write in the comments what touched you the most, even if it's anonymously, and subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of lucidity, protection, and mastery of the invisible games that shape who rises and who remains where they've always been.